Okay, cool. Well, everybody, before we dive in, let me give you a little bit of a spiel on what this is going to look like. We do a little recap before we get into our discussion about the episode. And since episodes can be 3, 4, even 5 hours long, we like to do a little recap that boils what happened down to about 10 to 15 minutes. And then we cut that out as a separate video, posted on the channel a few days after our deep dive discussion, and you can check that out to get an idea of what happened. But if you're on that video and you want to see our full thoughts, just click the link in the episode description and we'll go from there. So this was episode 114, Fight for the Bloody Bridge. And this basically opens with the party. They just finished their previous combat that Opal was wrapping up. And now they're moving to the heart of the fortress where the Bloody Bridge actually is, where the Malleus Key is. They essentially arrive at this courtyard that's set before the Malleus Key. They can see the Malleus Key. They know, Matt basically reminds them that to save Vax, they first need to get the, oh man, I keep thinking of Transformers, the cube, the beacon, the Luxon beacon out of it, which they don't know exactly where it is in it. And then separately from there, they know they will then be able to get the Vax orb out. However, there are a number of guards around, and there's also essentially we come to find out that there is a lair action where the Bloody Bridge is actually summoning down new Ray Lauren and Ruby Vanguard soldiers every round. We have our typical planning stage of like, what are we going to do? How do we want to do this? And essentially the party eventually jumps into combat to assault this bridge. One thing we do in combat is we try not to go through all the details, especially just so you can know this was a 5-hour plus episode, I think 5.5 hours, and about 5 hours of that was combat.
Yeah.
So just sticking to the high notes. Also, my dog's going crazy. If you can hear that, everything's okay. But sticking to the high notes, there are a number of thought eaters that are around this area that are guarding the bridge. There's also, I think there were a couple of like little beacon towers where we find out that the Weave Mind can actually like cast spells through or do actions through as well. But one thing that happens early on is we get a oh man, I can't think of what it was. A holy concentration, holy something from Liev Tel that gives them, I think it gave them like temporary hit points and then also caused all attacks against them to be at disadvantage.
Yeah, it was, I can't remember the name of it, but yeah.
Yeah, it was like this level 8 spell from our resident cleric, Liev Tel, which naturally, I mean, this is a party of level 20s, so it's not going to be a fair combat. We also have, as the battle begins, we have a couple of other people who arrive in the battle. One of them is, I think it was Vorak, which was this giant worm, which Bell's Hells had traveled through one of these tunnels on Rudis that was formed by one of these giant worms. So Vorak's here, and it begins the combat against the players. And then also we do have Ozo Kruth, the Sunder King, who arrives on this giant alchemically manipulated and experimented on Vidulch, which is known as Scrag. I think Scrag had a number of attacks, like 4 or 5 attacks, and also a poison spray. Ozo Kruth himself has a pretty insane attack that I think was called like Relentless Fury or like Unrelenting Assault or something to that effect, where essentially he can continue to attack as many times as he wants until he misses 3 times in a row, which we'll come to that a little bit later. Keyleth is going to cast Earthquake on the Malleus Key, and this process actually allows those beacon towers to be destroyed along with much of the other parts of the fortress. And I think, I don't know if this is cutting into your part of the recap, I think we also have Liev Tel, who does a divine intervention to try to get to that Luxon beacon, which it does in fact get exposed. And I think actually Scanlan has a Bigsby's hand that goes in and grabs it. Again, apologize if that's part of your half. It's kind of blurring together for me.
Yeah, I think that's the end of the first half is when they
perfect.
retrieve it.
And then the only other detail that happens in this half is Trinket is pokeballed out and put on the back of Scrag. And then separately, Grog actually is swallowed whole by Vorak. But within the stomach of Vorak has like 3 or 4 attacks from the inside, does over 100 damage, and is spit out from Vorak's stomach. And I think that's where we go to break if I'm not missing anything else.
Yeah, they basically, when Scanlan removes the beacon, Ruidus is no longer tethered to the planet, and so like the ley lines kind of disperse back to normal, no longer being held in place. And when we pick up the second half, again, it's like 90% combat. So to just hit the high notes again, we have a couple of cool moments here. One, Scanlan casts Dominate Monster on the Vidulch, Scrag, and that is a big swing in the battle. Ozo Kruth, who is a monster, actually uses that ability Blake was talking about, where he just goes until he misses 3 times on Vex, and basically takes her from full to dead in a single round of these attacks. And Matt, of course, asks for Vex's last words and last thoughts before she dies, and she thinks of her children, how Whitestone will be in a good place in their hands. And then the last thing she does is like look at Percy and say, "Save him," referring to Vax. Percy, of course, seeing this, loses it and goes, full no mercy Percy. His next round, he's just unleashing all of his attacks, all of his bullets, both action surges. So like it's a supremely long round, does a ton of damage, but doesn't kill Ozokruth by any means, and finishes the round by throwing Manners, his contraption Pokeball, basically, but just completely whiffs. So it was a bit of a kind of anticlimactic final moment that made everybody laugh. But after that, we do have Pike use her divine intervention to resurrect Vex. So even though she did truly and fully die, she was brought back by the Everlight, and then quickly gets on her broom and kind of flies away a bit to safety. Other than that, we have after Scanlan had retrieved the beacon, the Malleus key starts to crumble, and so Keyleth is looking for Vax within the tower, the Vaxel orb, and she does manage to see it with a high enough perception check, and she flies in there in her air elemental form and basically envelops the orb and rips it from the tower. And after she does this, the orb begins to like shatter and smoke pours out of it that eventually reforms into Vaxeldon. And he immediately rolls initiative and joins this fight and hits a nat 20 on his initiative. So that was a pretty cool moment. Other than that, we have Lievtel use her 9th level spell to cast a mass heal and heal like 500 or 600 points of health. But the Rylorans, Matt gets to use their fun little feature, which I think it's called Dampen Divinity or something like that, but it basically halves all healing. So it was still a huge heal, but that one feat took out like 300 worth of healing points for them. After that, we have a really cool moment. We start getting like the different how do you want to do this is on the different big entities in this fight. And for Ozo Kruth, we have this moment where Grog walks toward him, humming his own final boss music, as he puts it, and then walks up to him and just claps him with 3 attacks, splitting him in half, and basically using his corpse as a puppet, as he describes it, with his final blow. And then we have a really cool how do you want to do this on the huge worm creature, where Vex fires an arrow, and as a feature of her vestige, Fenthras, a tree sprouts from a creature that she kills, and Zirconos gets to kind of like combo this how do you want to do this with his own moment, and he like calls lightning down on the worm at the same time, and it like splits through this freshly grown tree. It was really cool. Unfortunately, Lievtel, I don't think, saw him do that, but he and Scanlan were still trying to, wingman. But so after that, the combat is pretty much over. We still have this dominated Vidulch that Scanlan is controlling, though. But he basically just has an airbud moment with it and like sends it away, like, "Be gone." So after that, combat pretty much has subsided, and so everyone looks to Vax. And he says, "It's been a while." And Vex says, like, "How dare you look younger than me?" But Keyleth just quickly asks, "How long? Like, are you gonna be here? Like, how long do we have with you?" And he's like, "I don't know. Like, I want nothing more to stay, but I can't." Because like nothing has changed in his perspective, even with all that's going on with the gods. He's still tethered to the Raven Queen. And Keyleth is like, "Well, what happens if she dies? Like, what does that mean?" And he's like, his only response is that, "I actually don't want that to happen. Like, I wouldn't have her go." And Keyleth is obviously kind of like off put by that comment, being like, "What do you mean?" And he goes, like, "Don't get me wrong. Like, I want nothing more than to be with you and to be with all of you. But, death is a part of life. And just because I wouldn't have her go doesn't mean I don't want to stay. She does a kindness to all of us in our end. But don't mistake me. I long for our life," meaning me and Keyleth. And she just says, "Well, when will your debt be paid?" And as they're kind of talking about this, the surrounding sounds of chaos and battle are kind of getting subdued, and we see that all of these reinforcements have started to arrive. Good guy reinforcements. So we have devils and planetars and wizards and mages and infantrymen all showing up. And one of these, I believe, celestials, but it might have been a devil. Matt just described it having golden skin, like this very tall, cloaked individual, like looks at Vax'ildan and is like, "Champion, the fight is now in Asilra. We have to go finish this." And he takes off along with a bunch of these other people. The presumption there was that he was also potentially a champion of one of the gods. Um, it's at this point that Vax kind of feels a hand on his shoulder, and it's the Raven Queen. He has like a whisper in his ear, and she says, "Those that fight to buck fate will march their own path, but in this moment, you choose what's important to you in this fleeting moment." And then the presence kind of disappears, and it says, "The night is yours." So Vax basically realizes he has a night before he's going to be called back to his duty, his tether. And so he takes Keyleth's hand and Vex's hand and is like, "Tell me what I've missed. Tell me about my nieces and nephews." And Percy says, "We'll do you one better than that. Let us go and let us rest." And they then tree stride through the tree that Vex just birthed from the giant worm back to Whitestone. And that's where the episode ends. Again, 114 of Campaign 3, the fight for the Bloody Bridge. And if you're just on our recap, be sure to check out our full discussion, which will be linked down below.